Hello, and welcome back to today's episode of Costa Rica Travel and Living Podcast. My name is Jessica Luecke. I'm going to be your host for today. I'm a local travel consultant here in Costa Rica. And today we're going to be chatting with Jose Roberto Soro. He's a sustainability expert and advocate here in Costa Rica. He's worked directly with the Costa Rican government on several different conservation initiatives. So we're super excited to hear from him today. If you guys are loving our episodes, feel free to follow along, give us a like, a thumbs up, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. So without further ado, let's welcome Jose Roberto. Hey there, Jose Roberto. How are you?
Hey, Jessica. Good. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are super excited to have you.
My pleasure.
Awesome. So I guess we'll jump right into it. Today we're here with Jose, and we're going to be talking all things sustainability and environmentalism here in Costa Rica. It's something that the country is known for, and so we are super excited to hear what you have to say. I think maybe to start off, would you be okay telling us a little bit about how you got into sustainability and environmentalism and kind of what's inspired you to begin working in this field?
Sure. Thank you so much. And greetings to everyone that might be listening to us. My name is Roberto. I was born and raised in Costa Rica, and I've been working alongside several NGOs implementing projects mostly to strengthen environmental governance in Costa Rica. And I am also finalizing a master's degree in political science at the University of Costa Rica. And my thesis is essentially getting deeper on how climate change is impacting community-based water management associations in Costa Rica. So yeah, pleasure to be here and happy to address any questions you may have.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. When are you set to finish your master's?
Hopefully I'll get everything done by mid next year. I was just in Guanacaste doing some interviews a couple of weeks ago. It was great. I feel like local communities have a lot of knowledge and they are the first impacted by climate change. So it's not something new for them, although concepts and like how it works might be new, they know that it is affecting them. So they are eager to implement policies and mechanisms to adapt to those challenges.
Awesome. So maybe for people that are listening that have never really dove into the climate change, sustainability, environmentalism world at all, can you give us like a high level, what's Costa Rica known for? What are some of the, I'm thinking in Spanish, logros. What are some of the high, large perspective, what are some of the things that the country is known for?
Yeah, sure. Well, as you know, and most of our audience must know, Costa Rica is a tropical country. So we live with forests everywhere. I mean, there's biodiversity everywhere. So the country really needed to take that into consideration on its own development goals. And I think it did. I think the country, especially in the 90s, was suffering from extensive deforestation across the whole country. And really prominently, a few environmental leaders back in the 90s, they promoted policies that changed everything completely. In the late 90s, Costa Rica was able to be one of the very few countries to revert deforestation. And that was made out of policies that were implemented. So I believe that the country has done a lot of efforts. We also have renewable energy at a 99% of all the energy nationwide. That's also a major milestone that was achieved thanks to policies also in the 90s. So since then, Costa Rica has been a strong leader in the region and able to implement a lot of initiatives.
It's really cool. There was a picture that was going around on the internet a few months ago of what they showed, like from a satellite perspective, what some of the forests look like in the early 2000s versus today, which and the grand scheme of things is a very short time. But when you look at these pictures, you're like, oh my gosh, what the country has been able to achieve in such a short amount of time is really inspiring. So yeah, I think, for those that are perhaps have never really dove into this world a little bit, the reforestation and renewable energy that we have here in Costa Rica is really impressive.
It is.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about what's going on, what's Costa Rica focused on right now? And when it comes to sustainability, what exciting things, is the country focusing on?
Sure. So as I was saying, Costa Rica has been really effective in promoting conservation policies inland, meaning forests, right? And actually, Costa Rica met the 30 by 30 goal, which is a like international goal to preserve at least 30% of the land. And also in 2021, Costa Rica was able to meet that goal in the ocean. Costa Rica now preserves 30 by 30 of all its land and ocean, at least in theory, right? In paper, we have a lot of national parks and different mechanisms to preserve those areas. And I believe that although the country was not prioritizing ocean action, it is now. It is now, for example, one case in 2021, Costa Rica expanded Coco Island National Park 30 times its size, and it was a major accomplishment that allowed the country to meet those goals.
And what would you say the biggest or the most affected forest area of Costa Rica, or the place that's benefited the most from the efforts of the country? Would you say it's more like the rainforest, like La Fortuna? Just like trying to think of areas that perhaps some of our listeners have been to before. Like, where do you think some of these initiatives have been most successful?
Yes, that's a great question. And we have national parks across the country, everywhere you go. So I would recommend anyone coming to Costa Rica to please go to our national parks. The fees that are collected get invested in the park. So it's very important that tourists attend and visit those parks. In La Fortuna, you have Arenal National Park. In Guanacaste, you have plenty, and sometimes people focus only on the beaches, which are very, very nice. I love them, and I go to the beach every time I can. But I would also recommend looking at those areas that are not like the most touristy, and you might also contribute to the country's conservation efforts. So everywhere you go,
I was going to say,
Manuel Antonio, Limon, Guanacaste, across all the province. In you have Arenal, you have Miravalles between Arenal and La Fortuna, you have Monteverde. Monteverde is a very special case because it's not a national park. It's a private land that then became a protected area. But everywhere you go, you'll find natural resources. So please, if anyone has the opportunity, don't miss it.
And is there a certain area that you think the government has done a better job or has focused perhaps more of their time and resources in conserving? Like, is it, is there a certain forest or area like Monteverde versus some of the beaches? Or is it really just based on, the parks that generate the most income that gets, reinvested back into that area? And so it really depends on the most trafficked areas?
Yeah, that's the point. And most of the larger parks that received most of the tourists get the most revenue from the government. So yes, that's an issue. But I would say that nationwide, the government meaning the government over the past 10 years, have been really effective in getting those areas protected. And now it is focusing also in the ocean, which is a fundamental part for Costa Rica's development.
And when we talk about like the government's been effective in some of these movements, like what might some of those movements be? Like what are some of the achievements of, say, like national parks or some of these areas? Is it planting more trees? Is it tracking and making sure that we have the proper flora or the proper fauna planted for the animals and wildlife in the area? Like what does that look like?
Yeah. Most of these areas are fully protected. So, and enforcing that protection is something that the country has done over the past years, but it's also a major challenge. For example, you got all these new marine protected areas that are aimed at preserving ocean wildlife, but then you have very few resources for, let's say, the National Coast Guard. So one of the main challenges moving ahead is strengthening how these areas are being monitored and basically all the control and surveillance that they need. And there are multiple efforts going on, but there's still a lot of work to do.
I think you mentioned earlier, like the marine conservation is a very new movement, right? Like from a Costa Rican's perspective, it's they've focused a lot of time, energy, and resources into the national parks and kind of the inland part of things. When did Costa Rica kind of start to make that shift over to marine wildlife conservation?
Yeah, I would say since the early 2000s, a lot of NGOs started working on that field, and thankfully, conservation funds and donors from the U.S. a lot actually, and from Europe have increased their share to protect ocean policies in Costa Rica. For instance, in 2021, the country won the UK's a UK prize that allowed the country to now develop a similar model to what has been done inland in the ocean. So in the 1990s, Costa Rica implemented payment for ecosystem services. Essentially, you're a private owner, and you have a small forest in your property, and you don't want to cut it down, but you need to do something with your property. So the government pays you essentially. The government pays you to preserve that area as a forest, even though if it's private land. And it also comes with other benefits, such as loans to develop ecotourism and other financial mechanisms. Now that model is being developed to be implemented in the ocean. There's a lot of questions around how it will be done, especially because you don't have private land in the ocean, right? So how do you pay people to preserve the ocean if it's not private land? But there are ways to solve the issue. For example, you got association of women fishers who receive the funds in charge of preserving mangrove areas, for example. So that's like the logic that the policy is now trying to be developed.
So would you say that Costa Rica is more focused now on marine wildlife, or do you think that they're still investing the same time and energy into the inland conservation efforts as well?
I think inland conservation measures are moving forward, and it's just that now the country is turning its eyes to the ocean. And that's mainly because the capital city, San Jose, is located in the Central Valley, right? So the country developed thinking of how it would be uh, shaped out of San Jose and not on the shore. So the whole country, I believe that it's turning its eyes to the ocean, and of course that increases ocean action and ocean policies.
It's really interesting because this country in Costa Rica is widely known for their deep sea fishing, right? And so
Mhm.
tell me a little bit about what kind of reactions these movements have been faced with when they go to, say, certain associations and fishing associations, and maybe the certain marinas, and they come with these new ideas, and what are the local communities saying about some of these ideas or movements?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm a believer that any conservation policy should be developed hand in hand with the communities, because those are the final users of those areas, and also having them engaged in early stages of the process, not at the end, right? From the early development of the policy, engaging them is something fundamental to ensure a successful implementation. I'm saying that because there are a lot of views and a lot of opinions in the communities about these efforts, but I can say, for example, that fishers have seen a decrease in their catches. They are aware that there is overexploitation of the fishing stocks, so somehow they are starting to realize that they need to do this, right? It's something that it must be done, because otherwise they'll run into shortages of catches, and they are aware that things need to be done. Of course, there is resistance from some sectors, but I believe that education is key. Any education efforts, environmental education efforts, are very much needed in coastal communities, so that people know why it is important, because it's not always easy to know why some measure is really key for the ecosystem. So explaining that is fundamental.
Well, it's interesting. I think it's part of the culture too, right? Like I remember coming here to Costa Rica 8 years ago and being amazed that, children, walking around in the rainforest or doing certain tours, Costa Rica, in my opinion, has very, very little litter. We don't have a lot of garbage in the streets here. We don't have garbage in many of like the rainforests and things like that. The Costa Ricans truly care about keeping at least the forests clean, right? And so, but if you said this started back in the 90s and this is, 2020, say, or even, 2018, when I started coming here, it's taken, 15, 20 years. And so maybe, in a few years, 10, 15 years, the marine side of conservation might, catch on or kind of that might become part of the new culture. But I think you're right, starting with education. And these people live, the marine life day in and day out as they go fishing. And so like like you said, I'm sure they can see what's happening.
Yeah, totally agree.
And so aside from beginning the education, what are some of the other challenges you guys are faced with?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because there's so many ways you can go into that question, right? Like whether it be, so yeah, what are some of the biggest challenges that you face seeing when you try to implement some of these new movements?
Yes, I would go back to my comment about control and surveillance. I believe that that's key. Most of the marine protected areas require some sort of control of the area, and we don't have, the country doesn't have sufficient agents to patrol the areas. So recent efforts have been related to implemented, for example, vessel monitoring systems, which are transponders that are placed on vessels, on fishing vessels, and basically they share their data with the Ministry of Environment and the Fishing Authority and the National Coast Guard. So these agencies can see from a screen where these folks are fishing, right? If they are getting into a protected area, if they are behaving in an irregular way, they can quickly reach out to them. So that's an effort that has been implemented since a few years ago, but there is still a lot of room for improvement. The longliners and the medium scale fleet are the ones who are entitled by law to carry these devices, but the artisanal fleet isn't. So there's a challenge in that area because given the limited resources of the Coast Guard, it is some technologies are required to face that challenge.
Awesome. When it comes, you were born and raised here in Costa Rica. Tell me about something, maybe when you were growing up or when you first started to get into this industry. Tell me something that as a Costa Rican, what is something that you are super proud of that the country has done or changed or bettered throughout, at least your lifetime, or something that you've seen or that you're super proud of?
Yes, I am especially proud of the energy sources that we use in Costa Rica. So basically, the government built several hydro plants in recent decades, and now we have renewable sources at a 99%. That's a major achievement and something that the country should be really proud of. And all those plants were built by Costa Ricans, by the National Electricity Company, and they really faced a lot of challenges because the country is really rocked. We have a lot of mountains, so it's not easy to build a dam here. And if you go to those reservoirs, it's very impressive how all the engineers were able to put it together with limited resources. So I'm really proud of that area, and also how the country has been able to engage communities in conservation, right? By, for example, the payment for environmental services. That's fundamental because people are feeling that they are receiving something in charge of what they are doing. There are a lot of challenges on that front. The system should be redesigned probably over the next few years to make it more attractive. Funding should increase. But I believe that structural things have been built in this country and that are sustainable over time, not only related to nature conservation, but also over time. So I feel like we have a way to go.
Awesome. And what gets you super excited about sustainability and kind of where Costa Rica is going, trying to be a positive impact on climate change and the movements? What gets you super excited about what the country is focusing on right now?
Yeah, it's very interesting that, for example, Costa Rica has one of the better rates in terms of access to safe tap water at home. And that's mainly because in rural communities, at least 30% of the population receives water from community-based water management associations, which are essentially organizations made up of neighbors who basically provide the service of water to all the rural communities in Costa Rica. And although they are facing really directly the impacts of climate change. For example, in Guanacaste, they're facing water scarcity. And on the Caribbean slope, that we have a lot of rain, they're facing thunderstorms that are getting heavier, storms from the Caribbean Ocean that are getting heavier. But they have managed to associate between them and to implement a lot of adaptation policies that will keep them safe in front of these impacts. So I'm really proud of that aspect as well. And I think that they are doing their work very well.
I have a random question. What's your opinion on the future of electric cars here in Costa Rica? Do you think the country's ready for it? Do you think it's the future? Do you think that the government is in favor? Tell me a little bit about what your perspective is there.
Yeah, the rates of electric vehicles, I mean, the number of purchases of electric vehicles have increased in recent years, as well as stations to charge them across the country. And also civil society organizations are, fostering a lot of efforts to ensure that someone can go from San Jose to, let's say, Corcovado, which is southern Costa Rica, and having a station there. So I believe that both civil society organizations and consumers are doing their part and organizing to make sure that the country is ready for an electric vehicle fleet eventually.
And it feels like, as someone, I'm actually in the market for a new vehicle. My husband are thinking about buying a new car, and we're seriously thinking about an electric car. And it feels like the country is very supportive of this movement, right? So, here in Costa Rica, every year we pay a tax in our vehicle called the marchamo, right? And I think right now, when you buy an electric vehicle, the first year is exempt, or it comes with the first year of marchamo. It's a lot of money, especially on a new vehicle. That tax becomes very high, and so it does feel like there are some incentives coming from the government to kind of help with that as well. So I was just curious on your perspective there.
Totally, I believe that. No, sorry, I was just going to say that. Both the government, consumers, and civil society organizations, they're all doing their part. So the ecosystem is strong, and it is what it's required, right? It can't be only the government. People need to say where they want a station, where it is needed. And I feel like civil society organizations are filling that gap. So I see a bright future for electric vehicles in Costa Rica.
It's exciting to think, that I could soon, as a travel consultant, be, renting electric vehicles to my travelers and having that be a suggestion, or having them get picked up at the airport in an electric SUV. I think that would be really cool to kind of see that as the future here. Speaking of travelers, people that are coming to visit, people that maybe snowbird down here and have a house maybe in Guanacaste, that want to be perhaps a little bit more proactive when it comes to sustainability and conservation efforts here. What are some small things that you and I can do in our day-to-day life, or for just coming for a week or 10 days? What are some things that we can do to be a positive, to have a positive effect on some of these things we've chatted about?
Sure. As I mentioned, visiting national parks, I believe, is one of the most effective tools to engage with environmental governance in Costa Rica, and to also, contribute economically to the development of these parks. I would also say that marine tourism is becoming increasingly important in Costa Rica. That's whale watching, dolphin watching, snorkeling, scuba diving, and it helps to keep the ocean preserved, but also to reduce the impact on fishing, because a lot of fishers are starting to engage in marine tourism and tourism in general in their coastal communities. So I would say that searching for those services, small services in the communities, is key. to make sure that you are also contributing to the locals, to the local networks and how the country is developing itself. So seeking for those community level activities, I think, is really helpful for them.
It's interesting, right? Because I'm a part of a ton of different Facebook groups for Costa Rican tourism, and you often see comments that say, oh, well, the Costa Ricans only pay $8 to get into the national parks, and they charge tourists $20 to get into their national parks. And very often, especially when you're not doing a guided tour and you're just going to do, to visit the national parks on your own, you don't realize the true impact that 50% increase in the entrance fee really makes on the local communities. And I think, going back to your comment before about education, a lot of it, in tourism, it does kind of start there. I've had countless amounts of travelers say, where can I go where I can hold a sloth? And I'm proud to say nowhere here in Costa Rica. And they, perhaps the travelers don't realize the negative impact that has on the animals. And so going to a country, having a guided tour that's knowledgeable in the places that they live in, that can educate you on, the issues and why, or perhaps the importance of some of the conservation efforts and why they do or don't do certain things, is super important. And so I think you're right. It does start, or it does have a great effect, in tourism. And, visiting the national parks here, there's a ton of really, really great ones. There's, like you said, there's off the beaten path ones that are very, that aren't talked about nearly as much. There are some that are super popular, like Mamon Antonio. I think the government just put some new restrictions on some of the national parks as well, right? So that they only can allow a certain amount of people per day, especially during the high seasons, so that they're not stressing out some of the wildlife in these areas. Is that accurate?
That is correct. And I was just go back to your comment on how you can like easily find a guide here and go to a national park and found a new universe of biodiversity. And recently this year, Costa Rica closed its last government-owned zoo in San Jose, which was the only remaining zoo. We have like small areas where you can, bring an animal that was harmed, or sorry, those
sanctuaries.
Yes, those exist, but zoos not anymore. And I would recommend to anyone coming to find a guide. They'll be locals. They have a lot of knowledge. They'll show you where the species are. They know where they are, so you'll see animals, you'll see a lot of biodiversity, and just discover a new universe. You do a night trip, a night visit to a national park, go on a boat to see the mangroves. Those are like really impactful income sources for local communities, and people will discover something new, right? That's only found here in the tropics. So going out and finding locals and engaging with them changes the whole perspective.
You're so right. And I've had so many travelers that they ask me like, oh, are there going to be fire ants, and are there spiders, and am I going to see a snake? And the answer is like, probably.
Yes.
Maybe not a snake if you're on a super, highly trafficked trail or whatever. But yeah, you're probably going to see some ants, and you'll learn the importance that, those leafcutter ants have in our forests here is amazing. Like, you'll never look at a leafcutter ant the same way when you actually learn what their function is, in the rainforest, right? And so it's exciting. And I think we hit on a ton of really interesting ideas, right? Like, Costa Rica is super biodiverse. You can pretty much go to any corner of this country and learn about it. The renewable energy here is amazing. The current movements with the marine wildlife conservation efforts is exciting. And I'm super, super happy that you're able to share all this knowledge with us. Is there anything else you wanted to share, or have our travelers keep in mind as they're coming to visit or possibly think about moving here to Costa Rica?
Yeah, I would encourage anyone to come to Costa Rica. I think this is a very friendly country. You'll be able to witness how the tropical forest works anywhere you go, right? You can go to the beach, but you'll have it there. You can go up to the mountains and you'll have it there. So engage the most you can. Find books about the species that are there, learn how the forest works, and you'll understand why you'll see those ants everywhere because they're part of a larger right? A larger ecosystem that is alive, that is unique. 5% of the global biodiversity is found here in Costa Rica. So go out, right? Come here, but go out. Don't stay in your hotel. Go out and find that national park that will be close to your location. Go visit, find a guide, and just explore, and explore.
It's super easy to do, right? Like whether you are at an all-inclusive hotel in Guanacaste, you're super close to Rincon de la Vieja, you're close to some mangroves, you can go to Palo Verde. If you're down in the OSAB, you literally just walk out of your hotel. There's tons of biodiversity waiting for you outside. You can go over to the Caribbean and, Caribbean side of the country. There's tons of wildlife there and biodiversity as well. So it's a really interesting country because you can explore and do so many things, even though you can get from one coast to the other in 7 hours. And it's a really, really small country comparatively to some of our neighboring countries, but there's a ton of things to do here. So thank you so much. It was awesome chatting with you. I will include Jose Roberto's information here below if anyone has any specific questions or wants to get involved. He's a really, really great resource to have. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, and thanks everyone who listened. I hope you get to come to Costa Rica and go out and enjoy. And if you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. Pura vida.
Ciao, pura vida.